Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to Logtech Live, the December episode, Christmas episode. I'm getting in the festive mood. We have our Christmas tree up already, thanks to my son. Thank you to everyone who's come back and joined us today. I'm Eric Johnson, technology editor at the Journal of Commerce and host of Logtech Live. First of all, before we get started, just wanted to say thanks again to our sponsor each and every month, Chain.io. Thank you so much for sponsoring our show. I have a great time each month. I'm really glad all of you could join us again today. We have a fantastic guest, Jett McCandless, CEO of a tiny little company that no one's ever heard of before, Project 44. We're going to bring him on in a second. But before we do that, just like every month, we're going to go through some news that I think is particularly interesting in the world of logistics technology. Before we get started, it literally just dawned on me this morning that the acronym for Logtech Live is LTL. That's I somehow came up with an acronym that works beautifully for a show about logistics. So I'm gonna run with that in the future now. Welcome back to LTL, I guess is the short form. So let's get started straight away. A lot of news going on as usual. There's never any shortage of things to talk about. I wanted to start off with something that is happening literally on a global basis, and I don't even think we've come close to the end of this sort of phase of vertical integration by massive, massive players in our market. I've talked in the past about Maersk going vertical. I've talked about CMA CGM going vertical. What's also interesting, we know Amazon is interested in this and has been for a while. I think what's really interesting is we're starting to see container terminal operators, namely DP World and PSA International, two of the biggest container terminal operators in the world, also making massive moves in this space, and that happened, and that sort of stepped up this week. As you can see here, my colleague Greg Noller reported on PSA International buying a pretty well-known global forwarder that's based in Philadelphia called BDP International. This is a development that I think we're going to see a lot more of, especially into 2022. There's a lot of money that has been made in 21 in logistics space, whether it's 3PLs, whether it's terminals, and certainly carriers. And that cash is going to be deployed in lots of places. I actually have a story up, the cover story in the latest print edition of JOC, the Journal of Commerce, is actually about that particular topic as it relates to the container lines. But we're going to see, I think, a lot more vertical integration. It makes a lot of sense in terms of owning assets, in terms of owning adjacent capability, whether it's technology, whether it's people on the ground, whether it's services. Just owning that vertical as well as horizontal footprint is going to become increasingly important, and really owning shipper relationships, right? You have PSA and DP World getting a lot closer directly to shippers than a terminal operator generally would. So that's first big kind of topic of the day. Moving on to our next topic, this was from a couple weeks back, and it's an interesting topic, right? The FMC has been in the news a lot, the Federal Maritime Commission, simply because of what's going on in the port of LA and Long Beach, as well as things like detention and demurrage, which FMC is taking a bigger sort of interest in as an oversight agency in the U.S. This came out mid-month about FMC seeking to kind of create an environment where data sharing is more prevalent around U.S. terminals, ports, I should say. The question is, this is one of those things where it makes a lot of sense in a vacuum, right? Like ports should be sharing data. We should have a common and cohesive and coordinated strategy around port data and port coordination. the question is like, what's the value and what are the resources required to make that happen, right? Because this is happening in other countries, and this is happening in certainly smaller countries that have a little bit more direct, kind of control over their port environments. We in the U.S. we have this very fragmented situation with ports, right? We have lots of different terminal operators. We have every port has its own authority. Sometimes it's landlord ports. Sometimes it's such as Savannah, where the state controls the entire port authority, and there's not individual terminals to be coordinated. So question is, it's a resources versus benefit question, and whether the private sector or whether existing organizations such as CBP, which is already collecting a lot of information on shipments moving in and out of U.S. ports, is the proper authority to kind of like coordinate this all, and whether what the FMC is sort of looking at might be duplicative or not. I had an interesting conversation with a tech founder from a long time ago who still has a company called Trade Tech, Bryn Heimbeck. I had a fascinating conversation this week with him about this topic. So just something to keep on your radar as you might hear more about this idea of port data sharing, which again in a vacuum sounds great. So moving on, the last Logtech letter, my weekly newsletter that I put out on Substack, I didn't after Thanksgiving. Sorry, I took the week off. Sorry, everyone. But the one I did before was about decarb and whether we have done enough in this industry over the last 2 decades, essentially, to get to a point where we can actually tackle the things that are in front of us. Like, obviously, decarbonization is this issue that is no longer a sort of superficial vanity thing that people want to be associated with. There's actually mandates that are coming, whether it's internal, whether it's governmental. There's things that the shipping industry especially is going to have to change. And so this last Substack that published on the 19th of November was about a set of stories I did around the impact that shipping just into Southern California was having on the local pollution levels there. And as I looked back on my reporting from a long time ago, it feels like we have not come as far as I might have suspected that we would have come by now. And that's probably the reason that we find ourselves playing a lot of catch up right now. So the question is, how fast can we catch up, and what are the things that we need to do to catch up? This is something that we're going to be reporting a lot on at joc.com. I'll be writing more about this on my Substack. And at TPM, both TPM and TPM Tech will be talking about this a lot. We have sessions on decarb in both of the conferences. That's in late February and early March next year. So definitely encourage you all to attend if you can, because that'll be a big topic of discussion throughout the 2 conferences. So last but not least, I wanted to talk about a story that I did around a survey that the Neutral NVO Eculine did around data API usage in the forwarding and logistics industry. And it was interesting. This is a topic that I'm going to get into with our guests today as well, around API adoption in logistics. But basically, the survey found that there is some adoption of API, obviously way more than we would have seen if we did this survey 5 years ago. But it's lagging, and part of the reason it's lagging is a little bit of current setup works. EDI kind of gets the job done even if it's not optimal. Spreadsheets get the job done even if they're not optimal. But there's still so far to go, and part of it is the culture, right? There's just not a culture around using APIs to connect systems yet, even if it is increasing bit by bit. And I think we'll reach a point where the ball will start rolling downhill, and it will just become absolutely natural for APIs to be sort of the default setting for our industry. But we're not there yet. And that's something that I'm going to talk with our guest today about. So with no further ado, let's bring Jett in.
Hello.
Hey, Jett. How are you doing?
How's everyone doing out there?
Good, good, good. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Jett. You're in Chicago today, right?
I'm in Chicago. I'm excited to be on this show. I've been looking forward to doing something like this. I always enjoy reading your content and looking at your weekly tech notes. I know you and I have had a lot of passionate, respectful, constructive conversations over the last probably getting close to a decade now. And
Something like that. At least 7 years. Yeah, we'll round up, right?
so,
Yeah.
so sounds good, like marketing.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly, right? Yeah, yeah. Well, cool. I don't know if you need to give a huge background on yourself, but you just want to give like the elevator pitch on who you are and what Project 44 is for the maybe the 1% of people who are tuning in who don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jett McCandless, the CEO and founder of Project 44. Project 44 has been around for about 8 years, and I've been in logistics since 1999. Started on the trucking side for a company called Yellow, that's now YRC. Spent some time as a shareholder and executive at Global Trans, and then started a consulting firm, Carrier Direct. But Project 44 is the connective tissue for supply chain, and we could measure that and quantify that in a number of ways. But what we try to do is kind of what this last article you talked about is connect to all the APIs, whether it's through Internet of Things or through a carrier's TMS or ERP, and normalize that and make it presentable for this demand side of the equation to access all that information. We go to market under the visibility. This is how we go to market.
Yeah, that's the sort of app, right, on top of the infrastructure, right?
That's right.
So let's give a little context. This past year, obviously, has been crazy, big picture in the market. But for you in particular, right, you went from last December announcing a pretty decent sized funding round, I think 100 million.
Yep.
You then bought Ocean Insights, followed by Clear Metal, followed by another $200 million round in the middle of the year, followed by buying Convey, right? So that's three pretty big acquisitions or major acquisitions, two pretty big funding rounds, and then a $1 billion valuation, right? So I can say that your name and the company, or Project 44, not you specifically, but Project 44 comes up in an awful lot of conversations that I have. What do you think, what was sort of the moment that you felt like P44 had kind of turned the corner from, plucky logistics startup, tech startup, to like, okay, this is a name that is just coming up in conversations all over the place?
Yeah, I'm glad you did that recap, because when you said that out loud, that felt like I should have taken 2 or 3 years, not 11 months. The team's been busy for sure. I would say in one way, I would say we haven't turned the corner, but I don't allow the team to get comfortable, including myself. We stay extremely paranoid. But if I was to say, turn that question into when did we cross the chasm, for those of you who read that book, I would say it was sometime in the middle of this year. And some data points I would point to would be we had one quarter where we booked over $10 million of new ARR, which is a pretty big milestone. And then when the Magic Quadrant came out, and I thought we positioned ourselves really well there. One of the things I care the most about, which is the ability to execute, we dominated in. Then when I started adding up the math of the other companies in the Magic Quadrant, Gartner Magic Quadrant, we're doing more business in a quarter than the next 7 competitors combined. So I feel like we've crossed the chasm, both from an market adoption, but also from dominating competitors standpoint.
Okay. Yeah, I have. It's interesting you bring that up, because I have some questions about like sort of where this market goes from here. And but you mentioned a financial metric. This is probably a good point for me to ask a question that's been on my mind a lot. You have been, especially in LinkedIn, very forthcoming, or very transparent, I should say, with your financial metrics and customer metrics, right? So I will say that the level of transparency is not typical for a company that's private, right? Like the numbers that you've put out are resemble something that you would see a public company doing, right? What's sort of the thought process behind being transparent around that? And secondly, well, maybe I'll let you answer that, and then I have a second follow-up. So,
All right.
what's your thought process around being transparent around that?
I think one that if you could put up really good numbers and better numbers than anyone else in the industry, then share them and let the market know what's happening. And so if you can do something that no one else can follow, that continues to strengthen your position as a leader. Now, on this call, I could say that I kind of just called a lot of people out, but no one will post their numbers because it would just really put a spotlight on where they are on the competitive battlefield. Also, I would say the real main driving factor of it is that we could file an S1 in June of next year if we desire. And it would be really silly for us to, I think your next question was going to be like, how real are they? But I'll wait for that. But for
That's my mind.
Yeah. So when you're looking at being public, there's a lot of rigor that's required and a lot of governance that's required.
Yep.
And you want to get into a motion of beat and raise numbers. And so what we're doing right now is we're developing that muscle at Project 44. And so I want the team to be accountable and to get into that motion and develop that muscle before they have to on the real public stage. So they know I'm going to continue to release numbers, and they know I'm going to continue to release our goals, and they know what we have to do, and we have to adjust the company. Beating and raising is a really interesting muscle to develop. It's different than just hitting numbers, because when you beat and raise, you have to adjust all your financial numbers behind the scenes, and that's a complicated motion to get into. And I don't want to practice that, up on center stage. I'd rather practice it right now when we're just a sideshow.
So that's really interesting. So in essence, you're sort of putting the pressure on your team that analysts would put if and when you go public, and there would be that pressure. And so you're okay. You read my mind. The next question was going to be, okay, from my perspective as a reporter, yeah. I have, if you think about it as a spectrum, on a spectrum, I have companies, I have 1,000 companies that talk to me, right? All along that spectrum, there's going to be people like you who I've known for a long time and have a good level of trust with, and you hopefully have a good level of trust with me. Yeah. There's people in the middle who I feel like I have a good relationship with, but they're never going to share anything like critical with me. And then people on the other side who I either don't know very well or we just don't have a decent rapport. And so they're not going to share much at all with me, right? So as I look at private companies, which I'm overwhelmingly covering, like there's not that many public logistics technology companies yet, I have to take every number that someone tells me, whether it's in a LinkedIn post or something they tell me off the record, with a grain of salt, because I can't independently verify it unless someone shoots me a doc that I can, trust, right? That has sure. those numbers. So I guess my question has been, it's difficult for me sometimes to parse when a company is trying to make themselves seem bigger than they are versus, and that can be off the record, right? Sure. On a phone call with me rather than what you're doing. And what you're doing is a higher wire to cross, right? You are putting out numbers that people can go back to and say, hey, that's not actually what those numbers were. So I totally understand what you're saying in terms of prepping your team to hit numbers in a very public manner that other companies are not maybe set up to do at this point.
Yeah, that's the main driver. But, I know you. I think you do amazing work. I think you've been a big catalyst for innovation in logistics, supply chain, tech. I think you have a healthy dose of skepticism. You're skeptical, but you're also really passionate about the innovation that's happening. So yeah, if you ever wanted, I'd show you the numbers for the company. And I'm a pretty open book. I would answer questions today if you wanted to know what's happening. Yeah. I think one thing that people probably don't understand out there with some of these VCs is we are backed by tier one venture firms, companies like Goldman Sachs and insight and emergence. And they do an incredible amount of diligence. So that's, there's a lot more scrutiny that we're probably under, other than some other competitors that have like tier 3 investors who do significantly less diligence than a tier 1.
Yeah. No, I want to get into that part of this too, because I think that's a big piece of this puzzle. But I wanted to ask about going public, right? Because you alluded to it. We've talked about it. You've talked about it with other publications as well, right? And it's a natural sort of progression for a company to try to think about making, right? So I've had some people, I don't think who are connected at all to you, who are just watchers of the space, who have been sort of curious as to why you haven't gone public yet. Like, if the metrics are so good, this is the year of supply chain, literally. It was on the cover of the New Yorker, 60 Minutes, right? Like, why not use this opportunity where it's like the retail investor and the institutional investor understands this space as well as they ever have? Why not use this year as the time to go public? Oh, Jett, you're on mute.
For a couple of reasons. So there's two ways you can really have an IPO right now. One is to the traditional way, and the other, which is where you do a roadshow with bankers. And that process takes about 12 to 18 months to get ready. And there's more than just accomplishing revenue goals and running a really good operation. There's a lot of corporate governance that changes across the entire company. Keep in mind, we have team members on 5 continents in over 30 countries. And that's a complicated Rubik's Cube from a governance standpoint. But you could go the SPAC route, and that's quite a bit easier. For us, since we are so close to be able to go to the traditional IPO, we just passed on the opportunities for SPACs. I think there are some interesting, I think you really see the SPAC market bifurcated. There's really high quality SPACs and there's pretty low quality SPACs. And for us, the dilution that comes to a SPAC just didn't seem worthwhile compared to what would happen to the traditional IPO. But another thing with Project 44, I'm proud of the numbers. And, we're finished this year at 96 million of ARR, but we came into this year at 33 million ARR and about 250 people. We're right about probably 870 some people today. We're finished at over 900. We hire about 75 to 90 people a month. But if going IPO takes 12 to 18 months, and you think about the company and the size, a $33 million subscription revenue company with 250 people, there's not anywhere close to the amount of structure that's needed. And so you have to hire, and this labor market, you don't want to rush. And you have to get funding, you have to put pieces together. In addition, when you're making acquisitions, those acquisitions, you need 3 years of audited books, and typically at a higher level from one of the big 4 accounting firms. And oftentimes these companies that are under, say 50 million of ARR, they're using great firms that are local, that run really nice audits, but it's not at the same level that you really need for public. And so those things just all take time to put together.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And to your point about labor, I read a really interesting tweet yesterday from someone who said it's never been easier to raise money, but the flip side is it's never been harder to hire the people that you need to justify the money that you're raising now, right? Like, one thing is always challenging, right? Before it was like maybe easier to get the talent you needed, but it was harder to actually get term sheet. Now it's flipped. So I thought that was super interesting, and interesting to hear you cite that specifically as a challenge, right? Everybody is facing it, right?
That's right,
for sure. Okay, so I alluded to the 3 acquisitions you made this year. I, along with some other people, did a map, or attempted. These maps are such a pain in the ass. They're so hard. I criticize the CB Insights, and a lot of the VCs have their own maps, and I criticize them so much. And after doing this for the first half of the year and doing iterations of it, you realize how difficult it is. And it's just, nothing is clear cut. It's hard to segment. people cut across different categories. You always leave someone out. You always include someone who probably just doesn't belong. But that aside, I think we did a reasonable job of collecting a lot of the players in the visibility space. And to your point about your size versus the others, that doesn't diminish the number of logos that are still in this space, right? And there's more coming up every day. And I've been reporting just in the last year about, companies that are maybe focused on a specific mode or a specific region getting funding, right? So that is all happening. Is the market consolidated enough yet? Does it still need to go through more rounds of consolidation?
Well, in preparation for today, I reviewed that that map that you put together. I thought it might come up, and won a great deal of respect for even taking a shot at that. Because to your point, no matter where it lands, how you how you created it, there'd always be someone upset or someone out there. No one's
It's
ever
obsolete. It's obsolete the minute you hit send. That's the problem, right? So it's
yeah. There's always critics out there, right?
yeah, for sure.
But I checked. I went through that list. I took a shot at it to try to get an understanding of what it means to us. I believe there are 29 logos on that list, and went through. There's about 4,200 employees across those 29. I mentioned to you we're somewhere in the 870s today. So maybe marketing, you round it up to, maybe by the end of today, someone's close to 900 or by next week. So it gives you an idea that we have about 35% of the total headcount of all of those logos. Now, headcount alone really doesn't mean anything unless they're productive. But when I look at our unit economics are amazing, and shows that we have great productivity that comes out of the team. The other thing that I thought was interesting when I looked at that Logtech map, we are the largest second generation Logtech company in the world. But we also, we're a SaaS company. So I backed out the 12 companies that were hardware, great companies like Tive, because that is a different,
of course,
that's a different motion, and we don't consider them competitors. We consider them partners, and we're connected to most of them.
Right.
And then there was one company on there that I wasn't familiar with, and I thought it was more of a TMS, had about 350 team members, and again, not a partner. But when I look at that group there will continue to be investing in that space and niche players and folks. But I also kind of think of it a little bit like it's kind of like internet browsers. There's about 24 out there, but there's one that most of the traffic goes through. And so I think it'll probably be something similar to that.
Yep. If I can weigh in on the question that I asked you,
please.
I see, and this is coming from conversations that I have with sort of users potentially of what you build and some of those other logos on the map is every shipper, for instance, is totally different, right? Like you take two companies, Coke and Pepsi, right? Like basically make the exact same product with a little bit more sugar or a little less sugar, but have totally different viewpoints on multiple things, right? And I think if you talk to anyone, they're all in different sort of evolutions of their data needs and their application needs. And I think that sort of fragmentation will kind of create this ever-flowing pipeline of new companies that try to readdress something that maybe wasn't done correctly or it wasn't done as well as it could have been because new technology comes on the scene, or maybe the founder is just 8% better than the previous generation's founder, right? So I see this pipeline of kind of niche data solutions just sort of like always coming up, right? And whether you're the one to sort of connect with those or aggregate those eventually and consolidate them, right? It's going to take someone. But I guess what I'm saying is like, I don't see that number of logos shrinking. I still see, with all the capital out there, I still see like more companies saying, hey, we can fix this little piece. And maybe we don't ever get to be a equal competitor with Project 44, but maybe we're valuable enough to connect with them, or valuable enough that they end up acquiring us at some point. So you're right. That map doesn't do a good job of contextualizing who does what and how big people are next to each other. Somewhat it was a conscious decision. We didn't want to like be seen to be playing favorites with different. It's essentially it's like here's a picture. Now go do your research, right? Like go talk to people. We can't do your job for you. This is not a procurement ranking map, right? Like you need to go and figure out what fits best for you. So,
there are other platforms that do that, like Gartner peer reviews or Magic Quadrant.
You can pay a good amount and have Gartner help you out with that. So this was a pro bono effort. So
I feel like on that topic, and I agree with a lot of the comments that you said there. I guess one thing I would say is that I think that we will actually continue to take more percentage of the market share, even if there are more logos. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, we can just deliver more value and we can support these large enterprises better. The two logos that you mentioned, Coke and Pepsi, are both customers of ours. And they certainly are different, but they both need connectivity globally. And our platform has the ability to support it on a number of continents and countries that they use us for a number of modes of transportation. And what I see with a lot of the smaller players, I see two things. I see there's a lot of innovation happening on Project 44. If you look at the Freight Tech 25 that came out, over 11 companies.
I don't look at that, but other people. I know.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Sorry. 11 of those companies are paying customers of Project 44. So the innovation's happening on us.
Sure.
And the other thing is a lot of these other smaller companies, because they're really services companies, and they may fancy themselves as SaaS, but if you really unpack them and you look at their customer concentration, and you look at how many engineers they have dedicated to an account, they're really services companies.
That's a super key point. That's something that the people that I trust, who I don't necessarily quote in articles, but who I like look to help me understand, especially the software market. Like I feel like where I usually need help is understanding how software works, not necessarily how a logistics function works. I definitely need help on that too. But the people I talk to who I inherently trust say that exactly what you said is like, you have to really scrutinize where services are coming in and sort of doing the work that software is presumably doing from the outside looking in, and really have a very good, and that's something I think as a buyer, you really need to be able to ask the question and understand whether the answer you're receiving is true and have a ability to decipher that, right? Is what part of this are you throwing people at, and what part of it is the system actually doing the work? So glad you brought that up, because that's something that comes up a lot in conversations offline for me. APIs. I think our very first conversation was with you and another one of your early execs at P44 talking about APIs. And I literally, I didn't have a software background. I literally had no idea what the hell you were talking about, right? Like that was, I distinctly remember someone reaching out. I think it was Ali. I think your former marketing person reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to have a conversation about this thing that we're doing? And I thought, okay, sure. I'm happy to listen to anyone. And I had zero expectations going in. And after, I think like an hour-long conversation, I was like, holy crap, seems like this might be kind of important to like understand. So, your origins were centered around getting people to realize the power of APIs versus existing kind of communication mechanisms in our industry. Where are we right? I don't think we have time in like 6-7 minutes to go through the laundry list of that evolution, but where are we now relative to like maybe where you thought we would be when you first set out on this path?
Yeah, I remember you wrote that first article. It really had a big impact on us in a positive way. And, I didn't know about APIs either. And we all started the same place. But what I knew was that logistics was broken and that there was information asymmetry between partners. And but I could look at other industries, like you look at communication and they had Twilio. You look at fintech and they had Visa and Stripe. You look at travel and they had GDSs that were communicating, sending information. And so with a little bit of research, you could see, well, how are they able to communicate just as many transactions a day or maybe more instantly? And things seem to run quite a bit smoother. I don't go to the local retailer and pull out an Excel spreadsheet and then email it over to the Walmart accounting department afterwards. I just swipe my Visa or Amex and it works.
Yep.
And so that's what really got me excited about doing this Project 44. One of the biggest mistakes I made as the founder of Project 44 is I tried taking on and spending marketing dollars on the EDI versus API battle. I should have just focused more on what's the outcome and what's the value, and wasted quite a bit of cycles there. But back when you ran that first article, most of the APIs were on version 1, and now most of the APIs are on version 10 or greater. In fact, one carrier I think they're on version 26 right now.
Yep.
So version 1 was basically almost the same information as EDI, but as the versions increased, folks realized there's a lot more additional information that can be sent than what was previously sent. So not only is it synchronous now, but it's also significantly more information that removes manual.
Not as rigid, right? Yeah.
And faster.
Yeah. I certainly like the tenor of conversations around APIs, I think is the biggest thing for me. Like I pointed to that survey, at least on the international side, about adoption, but it is interesting to hear companies like ocean carriers and kind of even legacy software providers that obviously had engineers who knew what APIs were, but they were not dedicated to building them, because that's just not how systems were set up to communicate between parties. And now it's like, yeah, of course, no duh, APIs. Like I feel like when I don't have to write out the full form of API in a JOC article, that's when I know we'll have crossed the chasm, to put it in your terms earlier. But I don't know if we're there yet. But and I remember the 70s gear and the record player, the 8-track you brought to, I think it was CSCMP, right? That was
good memory.
Yeah, that was funny. Those types of things stand out in a sea of vendor booths. So okay, so we have about 3 minutes left, so 2 quick questions. I had someone describe Project 44 to me as the internet of logistics. Is that a fair catchphrase?
Well, I think it's a pretty flattering comment. I'll have to think about it. It's pretty obvious how they came to that conclusion, but I'll have to think about it a little bit more. But it is a flattering comment, and there's a lot of parallels between it.
When this person said that, I've been chewing on it, and I'm not really sure, like, if I fully understand it, and maybe it's because it's like, it's sort of a theoretical idea more than a.
Sure.
I wanted to throw it out to just like get you thinking about it, and maybe we can have you back sometime and we can go into this.
I'm fortunate enough to be invited back. Maybe we can unpack that.
Yeah. So last question. We touched a little bit on kind of VC mindset. By the way, Bart from Gartner chimed in with a great comment, so encourage everyone to look at that around the consolidation in the space. And Bart is the one who put together that Magic Quadrant you referenced, so certainly encourage you all to read everything he puts out in his team. VCs. Okay, so this is something that in this show I try to like sort of capture the mindset around how VCs look at our industry. What's one thing that you sort of wish everyone innately knew about how venture capital works in our industry?
That's a great question. Only one thing, huh?
I mean, if you have a couple things, but yeah.
I would say that I think that and I was guilty of this, I think that there is a misunderstanding on I think that VCs kind of get put in this bucket. And I don't think people understand there are many different qualities of venture capital. I mean, they're different size, different rounds, different talent. I mean, anyone can open really a firm, but you have your clear winners out there. And the amount of work that the tier one firms do and the resources that they have to keep track of companies, and they're constantly talking to the market, is significantly different than, say, a tier three venture firm or private equity firm that basically gets the scraps that are left over, and diligence doesn't matter as much. And so if the market knew who tier one, tier two, and tier three was, and the effort that went in there, they could pretty much almost select their technology provider by that, because they have different motives, they have different timeline horizons, they have different voices they bring around the board. Because anytime you're taking venture money, you're pretty much putting someone on the board. And I think these companies are trying to figure out who should their technology partner be for the future, because even Project 44, which I think we're dominant in a lot of ways, it's a journey, and it's something that a company is going to invest in integration with, and it's going to go for a long time. So if they understood how each venture firm worked, or the different tiers, it would be a lot easier for them to make a buying decision on who they should go on that journey with.
Yeah, very interesting. I think there's starting to be a little bit more understanding around that. I think the other dimension is there are firms that have a long track record of having understood and internalized the nuances of our industry, and there's some that have done a lot of work in the last year or two, but are not quite as far along as the ones who've invested in companies for 8-10 years and now have the battle scars and understand what revenue structures are and what, how buying patterns work and that sort of thing. So some things you can learn in a short period of time. Some things you need, like we know, 20 years, you need to just learn over time, right? So that's another dimension I'd point out. Well, Jett, I'm sure we could do another 30 minutes easily, but unfortunately they're going to kick me off in a bit. So I really appreciate the time and the candor. Thank you so much for coming on to Logtech Live this month.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for your time. Cheers, everyone.
Yeah, have a good Christmas. Bye. But all right, thanks again, Jett. So we're gonna quickly wrap up here with our two end of the show gimmicks. Dad joke of the month this month, and this one comes directly from my 8-year-old son. So you can blame him if it's really corny. Did you hear about the kidnapping on the news? No? Don't worry. He eventually woke up. I know it's terrible. I just didn't have a better one this month. So again, send all the hate mail to my son. Well, send it to me. Don't send it to my son. That'd be weird. Okay, so let's move into buzzword of the month this month. So I'm going to use a buzzword that is, I think people don't even think of it as a buzzword anymore because it's said so much and it's such a big part of our world right now. Digitization. Okay, let's have some real talk about digitization. Okay, sometimes called digitalization, which is I think more of a European kind of way of saying it. But what is digitization and how important is it? It's very important. But let's maybe first talk about what it is not. So digitization, less and less, thankfully, but I feel like has often been conflated with automation. If you're digitized, that means everything is automated. People are not required anymore. Everything is, you can just have machines running everything. That's not true. Digitization is a step on the path toward automation. So if I think of it as a progression, you need to digitize data. You need to digitize communication between parties. In logistics, that means both internal teams as well as external partners that you work with. You need to digitize ingestion of information. You need to basically get everything in a structured electronic format. That's digitization. Next step is doing something with that information once it's in a structured apples to apples kind of format, right? So digitization is hugely important. It's basically the foundation of everything that I write about and that we talk about on this show being valuable and beneficial and needle moving. But it is not the end all be all. It is almost like the first step on the path toward where a company envisions itself going. So we shouldn't think of digitization as some sort of end of the journey. It's the end of the start of the journey. So with that, I want to say thank you everyone for tuning in. I thought this episode was fantastic. Jett was great. And thank you for all your comments and questions that came in. Thanks again to chain.io and for sponsoring like they do every month. And have a great holiday season, everyone. And we will be back right after the new year with our next episode of Logtech Live. And thanks again to Sarah and her team at Let's Talk Supply Chain for a fantastic first half of the year of our show. So see you all in the new year. Bye-bye, everyone.